Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever struggled with your family, whether at home or away, then do we have the Overcoming Your Difficult Family show for you. Today I'll be talking with Eric Maisel, PhD, retired family therapist, creativity and life coach, and the author of more than 50 books, including Mastering Creative Anxiety and a brilliant new read, Overcoming Your Difficult Family. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about 8 skills for thriving in any family situation. That plus we'll talk about silent screams, wearing body armor, the importance of a snow globe, imaginary critics, failing at birth, I think I did that one, and why in the world you don't want to get too warm by being by your computer. So welcome to the show, Eric. Are you ready to shine?
I am indeed. I feel like a supernova right at this moment.
As long as we can avoid the implosion part.
Yeah, I would like to avoid that part. Thank you. Maybe I'll switch metaphors.
I like it. No, we'll go with it because you're shining super bright. In fact, you're shining so bright, you've written over 50 books now. Were you always creative as a child?
I think I was always thoughtful as a child. Things interested me. I started out as a little math and science boy, and I went to a math and science high school in New York City called Stuyvesant, and I thought I was going to be a physicist or an astronomer. So those things interested me for a while. Then I realized there was nothing particularly human about those things. I kind of liked the metaphors of big distances and what have you, but ultimately I needed to do something a little bit more human. So I segued from science to first philosophy, then psychology, after I got out of the Army.
Very cool. And we're going to go there in just a second. Actually, the thought that comes in my mind is, did you like Isaac Asimov?
Not only did I like him, Stuyvesant was such a high-powered school that he came to our school just to chat with us. We were that kind of school. No. We had stellar New Yorkers come visit and tell us things.
Awesome. All right. So if we go back in time, a little family capsule. Oh, that's interesting. That was completely unintentional, a little slip there. Since we're talking about overcoming challenging families here, what was your family like growing up?
2 different kinds of families in the sense that my mom and I moved out from the main large family when I was about 5. So there was the first family, like 0 to 5 years old, and that was the large, crazy, extended family. Grandma, grandpa, my mother's sisters, lots of trips to insane asylums where the sisters would be incarcerated for times, lots of dramas, lots of things going on. I was fine with it all because I would sit there with a chicken leg and just watch, and I was pretty much undisturbed by it. But it was one of those chaotic, large immigrant families in the Bronx. And then when we moved to Brooklyn, my mom and I, it was just the 2 of us, and I had a very quiet time from there on in. So I grew up essentially alone in the sense that my mom would work and then come home and turn on the TV. So she had her room. I had my room. I was a latchkey kid from very early on. I'd get on the subway at 6 or 7 and just wander around. So I had 2 different experiences. One was the extended, nutty, everything going on family, and then the very quiet family, which I much preferred.
Is it that juxtaposition or maybe even the early years that got you interested first in writing novels and then in psychology, understanding the human drama?
I can't tell you anymore what the genesis of anything was. I was reading Sartre at 7 or 8. I've loved existential thought and existential literature for the longest time. Sartre writes in his autobiography, Les Mots, that he was happy not to have a father laying full length on him. I was likewise thrilled not to have a father laying full length on me. I was out on the streets of New York like all kids were back then playing ball, and then when the dads would come home at 5 or 5:30 or 6, all hell would break loose. All of my friends would suddenly be tyrannized. So for the longest time, I've had the sense that family life was difficult for those people who had to live in families. And to repeat myself, I was happy that it was just my mom and I, and that we could live quietly, because the folks around me, my friends, seemed to be really troubled by having families.
So what was then, if we fast forward, actually before we fast forward, I've got to ask, as a creative, I want to dive into this book because I think it's so important that we look at familial situations to help us now and prevent traumas for the future that we then have to deal with. But you ended up becoming a creative coach for quite a while. What is that? Because it seems to me, as a highly creative who has surfed the waves of creative angst, more than I care to care to share, what is a creative coach?
Let me start back a little further. So
Please.
At some point, I was living by being a ghostwriter and by writing fiction and doing things, but not making enough money. So I retooled as a family therapist, a California licensed family therapist, in my early 30s, and I started working with artist couples, which is, you can imagine, daunting to have two artists in the room. But very shortly, I realized I didn't believe in the pseudo-medical model of therapy. I just didn't believe that I was diagnosing and treating something called mental disorders. I thought these were folks with problems. So I segued to what I called creativity consulting, because way back then, maybe this is 1990 we're talking about, coaching didn't really exist as a profession, or if it did, I didn't know about it. So I did creativity consulting, and then when coaching became a word that people knew, I switched what I was doing to creativity coaching. And by that, I mean, I was still working with the same people, helping folks with all of the challenges that creative folks face, whether it's marketplace challenges or blockage and resistance getting the work done, or the roller coaster, the sort of pseudo-bipolar disorder, up and downness of being excited to get some work done and then plummeting when the work isn't wanted, just all of that up and downness. So I've done many, many books in this area, whether it's creativity and depression, creativity and anxiety, creativity and addiction. This life interests me. I think if you ask me, is everyone creative, I'm going to nod and say sure. But I actually think that there's a person who pops out of the womb a little stubborn, fights for his or her individuality, his or her whole life. And it's that person I'm talking to, that person I'm working with, that person who has a certain meaning-making needs, certain life purpose intentions, different from other people.
So, and if I back up, thank you for sharing on that. Since we've gone down this road, I think it's something that's an important part of your path and important for us to hear. What have you found wrong or doesn't work with the medical model of psychology?
It's a fraud, is what it doesn't work. It's a very long story. I'm in the critical psychology, critical psychiatry camp. I write the Rethinking Mental Health blog for Psychology Today. I function as the editor for Parent Resources at a big website called Mad in America, which is Robert Whitaker's website, the biggest critical psychiatry website in the world. So it's a very long story, but I'll give you some of the headlines.
Sure, please.
There's no such thing as a mental disorder. Many people in a high-ranking positions of authority have said that and still are not heard. The head of the National Institute of Mental Health said some years ago there's no such thing as depression or schizophrenia, meaning there's sadness, there's despair, there's hearing voices, there are all sorts of phenomena, but to attach a label to them does no good and is illegitimate. And to then act as if you've actually diagnosed something biological, which then gives you the right to prescribe chemicals with powerful effects, which are not medication. Everyone thinks they're medication because they think there's an illness being treated. But since there's no illness being treated, they aren't actually medication. They're merely chemicals with powerful effects. That isn't to say you may not want that effect. I want to be clear here. You may want a particular effect, but that's different from it being medication that treats an illness. Let me give you just a quick example or analogy or metaphor. If a rhino's raging at you, charging you, we have tranquilizer darts that can put the rhino down, but that doesn't mean we've diagnosed why the rhino was raging or why it's attacking us. It's just that we have a chemical that can do something. Lots of the chemicals in psychiatry function like that. They can do something without anybody knowing what's actually going on underneath. And for me, it's one thing if adults want to go down that route and act as if they have some biological something rather than they hate their job or their wife or they're this or they're that. They want to act like they have a biological something. That's kind of their business. What I hate is how children are being diagnosed with made-up diagnoses and are therefore now, not unusually, on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 chemicals at the age of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. It's really scandalous, and it ought to stop, and that's one of my areas of interest-advocacy.
There's a lot we could talk about there. We may have to have you back. I started quite a few years ago when it wasn't in vogue yet. At the age of 7 was when I got put on Ritalin for many years. And my take on it is it helped me to focus or to stay seated in a very unnatural environment that was extremely boring to my hyper-creative mind, but it turned me into a zombie during that time.
Exactly. And there are many big, good studies that show that the clearest indication that ADHD is nonsense is that kids who are the youngest in the class are going to be diagnosed with it the most. Namely, it's often a maturity thing. If you're a full year younger than the kids around you, you may be jumping around a lot, and you're going to get this ADHD diagnosis, and you're going to be started on one of these chemicals, and then you're going to go down the path. Everyone's now wondering, why do we have this opiate epidemic among kids? Wow, we've been giving them opiates since they were 5. How surprising that we now have an opiate epidemic. It's really nutty that folks are not making these connections between what we're doing to kids and how they're turning out.
Yeah. So let's take a positive turn. Why? Let's switch gears here. We may come back there at some point, but let's and it's a topic that's extremely near and dear to my heart, to say the least. And I actually wrote a book about it a few years ago, many years ago now myself. But let's talk about your book and why you wanted to write a book on overcoming family difficulties.
It connects to what we're talking about because the zeitgeist has it that people have individual disorders, that there's no context, no circumstances. Circumstances don't seem to matter. Original personality doesn't seem to matter. Context doesn't seem to matter. You've caught this, whatever it is, depression flu or addiction flu, or you've caught something. And so I wanted to write some sort of counters to the idea that context doesn't matter. Of course it matters how our family life is, whether it was our childhood family or our current family. Of course it's going to make us anxious if we're growing up in an anxious family. Our anxiety is not really located in us alone. It's a function of us being in an anxious set of circumstances, or in an anxious vortex, if you like. So part of my desire to write this book was to remind folks that context and circumstance matter, and it's not okay to just think of things in terms of individual diagnoses. That's why I wanted to do family therapy. That's why I became a family therapist. As you probably know, as listeners and viewers probably know, that the basic idea of family therapy is that family life matters, and that the identified patient, namely the kid usually, is carrying the difficulties of the family. And it's not fair to just put some diagnosis on the kid and let the parents be sort of exempt in this equation. They're doing something. They're part of this equation. It's not the same as blaming them or making anybody feel guilty or what have you. It's just the truth of the matter is that the kid is reacting to what's going on in his or her family life. And we have to be reminded of that. We've lost that somehow, that families matter.
There's not a big enough word for superlative on top of thank you that I can give you for saying that. Both looking at my childhood, so many others' childhood, and kids today who are struggling with their families, and yet they're the ones to blame. They're the ones with the diagnosis. Put them on the pill when they're just really a symptom of a family that's even raging out of control, for instance.
Yep. And one of the proofs that this is what goes on is, you may know, that the average time a psychiatrist spends with a new patient, whether that's an adult or a child, is now 15 minutes. What can possibly go on in 15 minutes? It has to be a checklist kind of thing. That's the only thing that could go on in 15 minutes. And it's not even a checklist. It's really transactional. I come in and I say I'm depressed. You, the psychiatrist, say you're depressed, and you start writing the prescription. It's just you echoing my self-diagnosis, and we go down the route of chemicals instantly. So I think that's one of the genuine proofs of how little exploration is going on with respect to what's going on in a human being's life, is how little time psychiatrists now spend with their patients.
So let's transition from there and let's take some time, I'll use that word, together, and let's talk about 8 skills for thriving, not just surviving in different family situations, but thriving in different situations. And the first one you talk about is being smart. What does that mean?
Before I answer that, let me just provide the following headline, which is, I don't believe anybody can learn 8 skills. We can barely learn 1. So I want to set the bar low for readers of the book, and that is, if you can practice any one of these 8 things,
Thank you.
It's going to help you. I just don't want to overload folks with the idea that they have to learn 8 things, because nobody can. Now, to circle back around to the question, these skills are interconnected in that when I say being smart, I also mean somehow being present enough and calm enough to actually see what's going on in your family, and then plotting your course given what's going on in your family. If you are noticing that your family is one of these sad and anxious families, well, that means you're going to have their sadness and their anxiety to deal with. And that may also mean that there is some genetic component. Maybe you were born a little sadder, or a little more anxious, or a little this or a little that. So now you have that to deal with your whole life. And how are you going to do that? Different from chemicals. So what I mean by smarts there is noticing what's going on in your family, going into that room that is your mind, getting a nice easy chair there and getting comfortable, and trying to figure out how you're going to negotiate these challenges, which are actually never going away. You're seeing your parents till the end of time at Thanksgiving or whatever, and you're looking in the mirror till the end of time. If you are a person who is already sad or anxious or this or that, you're going to be dealing with those challenges from now till the end of time, and you want to be smart in how you do that dealing.
So it means to grab that rocking chair, you're sad and anxious, and to go plant yourself down in the chair and say, what is really making me sad and anxious?
That, or therapy asks that kind of question, and coaching asks a different question. What should I do this week to be less sad and anxious? They're really 2 different approaches, and they're both legit, but they're 2 different approaches. I think it's hard to know how we've become how we've become. I don't actually believe in the therapy emphasis around, so to speak, trying to understand how we became what we became, and spending lots of time talking about incidents, because much of that is just repetitive talking. It's the story we now tell. We don't even know what we're saying anymore. We just tell a story about our childhood or about how we became. So for me, I'm much more interested. If you believe that you're sad, my question for you is, how are you getting less sad this week? Or if you believe you're anxious, my question for you is, what's your anxiety management tool that you're actually learning and owning and practicing this week? So to repeat, both ways are legit. But for me, I really need you to bite into the question of what you're going to do rather than just tell me what's happened to you.
Thank you. And that segues to your next tip, which is being strong, because if we come up with a tool, we have to be strong to use it. What does it mean to you to be strong?
It means a lot of things. One kind of thing it means is, let's say that you do want to learn an anxiety management skill. Well, we know that new habits take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 3 months, 4 months. New habits take time. That means, and this is a human sense of strength, that you have to get back on that horse of learning that habit day in and day out. Most people will slip, won't do the new habit on day 2. You have to instantly forgive yourself that you slipped and have the strength to say to yourself, I'm trying again tomorrow. That's a human-sized strength. I'm not talking about being able to lift up the front end of a Chevrolet, but really the strength to follow through on one's own intentions, including one's life purpose choices. This is its own separate subject, but it's important. Most people still are mulling over the is there a purpose to life or is there a meaning to life kinds of questions, both of which I think are fruitless questions. I think they're only our life purpose choices. There are our decisions about what's important to us. And then meaning flows from actually living your life purposes. Meaning is a certain kind of psychological experience that you get to create or influence by virtue of actually living your life purposes. That's all by way of saying, let's say you get clear on that, and now you create your menu of life purpose choices. Well, now you need the strength to actually live them, because many of those life purpose choices come with consequences. And we don't want life to have consequences. We don't want our divorce, which we know we need, to have consequences. We don't want speaking clearly to family members to have consequences. All of those things will have consequences, and you need the strength to face the fact that there will be consequences.
Is there a way to, it's ironic here, but strengthen the strength muscle?
I think there are lots of ways to attempt to do it. I have lots of ceremonies in the book. I believe in ceremonies. A ceremony for me is just an exercise kind of enacted with a certain solemnity and carefulness and mindfulness. So this would be to strengthen the aspect of risk-taking that is a feature of strength. And that's just put out 2 scatter rugs, 2 little rugs, and visualize a deep gorge between the 2 rugs. This really horrible depth that would be scary to fall down. Experience that and then just step over it. Step from one rug to the other. That helps a person realize that as scary as the consequence that's coming may feel, it may actually be much easier in reality to step right over it than we're thinking it will be. So I think there are lots of exercises we have to do to strengthen ourselves. There are things we must do. We can't just keep thinking, I'd like to be stronger.
Yeah.
We have to enact ceremonies, try exercises, and try things out in the real world. And especially, and this is half an aside, make sure that we're thinking thoughts that serve us. That is, make sure that our thoughts aren't weakening us. It's a big deal point because most people throughout the day are actually thinking thoughts that don't serve them and that function as weakening thoughts.
So speaking about thoughts and about ceremony, can you share what's a personal symbol and how that can be important for us?
Yeah, this comes out not so much in this book. I did a book called Life Purpose Boot Camp, which discusses many of the things we're discussing around life purpose choosing. And it's always struck me that Christians get something very important from their cross. Jews get something very important from Star of David. There are ways in which I call them icons. These icons hold a ton of meaning and value for the person who believes in those things. But virtually no one ever creates a life purpose icon of their own that they then maybe fabricate into a piece of jewelry like a cross or a Star of David, or into their screensaver or somehow. And when I discuss this with folks, often their life purpose icon comes up for them super quickly. They get the idea that there's some image that would do sort of a lovely job of encapsulating who they want to be, how they want to make themselves proud in life. I was doing an interview, a television interview, and the interviewer was sick, and so the weather woman ended up doing the interview. And we did it on her weather set, and we were talking about this, and she said instantly, lightning bolt. It just made perfect sense to her out of her weather life that a lightning bolt was going to stand for her as her life purpose icon. So that's a long-winded way of saying there are lots of different ways to keep our life purpose intentions close, and we actually need those many ways, because if we don't, we just spend our days doing things on our perpetual to-do list, and we end up not actually living our life purposes. It's harder to live our life purposes than folks realize. They know it's hard, but they don't actually realize how hard it is.
Thank you for sharing on that. You brought up something I'm almost hesitant to share it when you mentioned screensaver. I'm thinking back to grad school, and I made it through. I did well, but I wasn't conscious of how symbols and images have meaning. And instead of successories, those beautiful posters that say something positive, I had a list of 50 for my screensaver of failures, seeing a mountain biker crashing, seeing somebody losing a girl and say, forget it, man, she's gone. And I had no idea how much those images burn into our brain and affect us directly.
Yep. And as an atheist, the following will sound funny, but I do believe in altars. Mm-hmm. I do believe in setting up around us the things that serve us as opposed to the things that drag us down. For me, I always have a postcard of a Paris cafe sitting around because that's one of those things that has meaning for me, etc. I like river stones to hold. So I acknowledge what you're saying, and I agree that was not a brilliant screensaver. And we need to be careful about what's around us, but especially we need to be careful about what we're saying to ourselves. Let me just stay there for 1 second, if I may, and that is, folks know about negative self-talk. What they don't realize is they're often held hostage by true thoughts. We don't have to countenance true thoughts just because they're true. A true thought may not serve us. So what do I mean? Let's say you're a writer and you go into a bookstore and you see all these books and you inadvertently, half-consciously say, wow, there are a lot of writers out there. That's a perfectly true thought that does not help a writer to think. And what happens, because there's a temporal disconnect here, writers don't get this. They think this thought on a Monday and they stop writing on a Thursday. And they don't get why they stopped writing. And that was that something's been festering about how many writers there are out there and how much competition there is and how little chance they have. And all of that's somewhere out of conscious awareness been going on in their psyche. So when you hear a thought, when one hears a thought like, wow, there are a lot of writers out there, you have to dispute that thought instantly, not as being untrue, because it's abundantly true, but as not serving you. And it's a big distinction between truth and service there. Folks need to get this idea that it doesn't matter if a thought is true. The high bar place, what the Buddha said, get a grip on your mind. The only way to get a grip on your mind is to be thinking thoughts that serve you.
So if we're hyper present here, and I just love the word presence, and to bring presence to everything, bring presence to your mind, and we're in the bookstore and we start to hear, wow, there are a lot of authors out there. Cut it right there. Replace, or where do we go with it?
That's right. It's a 3-step process, and you've named step 2. Step 1 is hear it. Hear that you said it, because we're tricky creatures and we don't want to hear what we're saying. The ways we avoid doing our real work nowadays is by saying, I'm too tired and I'm too busy. And because there's so many grains of truth in those 2 utterances, we let ourselves off the hook because they sound true to us. So even hearing something like, I'm tired or I'm busy, we have to deconstruct even those kinds of utterances to make sure what we're meaning there, and to wonder if we can append a but there. Yeah, I'm tired, but I could spend 20 minutes on my novel or something like that. So 1 is hear it. 2 is what you said, dispute it instantly. And I'm going to be a little loud here. No! No thought. No. You are not no, you are not true. Just to repeat the distinction. No, you are not true. No, you are not serving me. And then that almost sounds like enough. Hear it, dispute it. There's actually a 3rd step, not unlike getting rid of your screensaver. The 3rd step is to now substitute something more affirmative. Just have your global affirmation, your global smart cognition, your global positive thing that you say to append at the end of that process. It might be, I'm fine. For me, a word people may not get, can't possibly get, my resonance is around the following word. But I use the word process almost all the time as an affirmation. Something's going on that hasn't worked. Spend 2 years on a book that hasn't worked. Most people are going to badmouth themselves and beat themselves up. It's really hard to spend 2 years on a book that doesn't work, come out the other side of that okay. For me, I come out perfectly okay. It's just process.
Part of the process.
Part of the process. So just to repeat those 3 steps, because they're important to know: hear what you say to yourself, dispute those utterances that don't serve you, and then have some thought substitute to insert there that canalizes your brain in the direction you actually want it to go.
I like process. I'm often telling people, and I've often told myself, that it's part of the path to take you wherever it is that you want to go. It's part of your path to be here right now. So process is brilliant. That works fantastically well.
Everybody intellectually gets that. Viscerally, they hate it. There's an interesting distinction there. Everybody gets it that there's a process. Mm-hmm. But they really don't want to hear that they might have to spend 2 years on a novel that doesn't work. They don't want to hear that they may do this much work, this much of which is any good.
Yeah.
How many of Bob Dylan's 5 trillion songs are great? This many. How many of anything you could name, Beethoven's works are great? This many. And pundits will say that Beethoven's first, third, fifth, and seventh symphonies are better than his second, fourth, sixth, and eighth. I don't know, but I know you can't do 9 without 8. You can't do 8 without 7. You can't skip the things that don't work. That's what all of my creative folks want to do. They want to skip the things that don't work. You actually have to just do them. You can't skip them.
Since we're talking about families, though, most families teach us you've got to get it right the first time, or I can speak for my family specifically because I have what I call I don't have, but I inherited, and I've hopefully wiped most of it clean from the slate, the screw-up gene. If you don't get it right in the first try, then you're a screw-up. Why didn't you get it right? Which makes it very hard to appreciate the process.
Let me name the 8 skills now, because that'll go right with what you're saying now. Mm-hmm. So let's say that this is a family rule - message - injunction - whatever. So the 8 skills are smarts we talked about, strength we talked about, calmness, clarity, awareness, courage, presence, and resilience. I think a listener or viewer can get how you would need all of these different aspects of being or doing to deal with that kind of message. You need to have the courage to have your own way of being, to stand up for your individuality, maybe to even say something like, I have to make mistakes. If you want me to be an imaginative, truly, no 3-year-old is going to say this, no 5-year-old is going to say this, but maybe a 14-year-old can say, if you actually want me to be an imaginative, creative person in life, that comes with mistakes and messes. Mm-hmm. I'll do okay on the exams because I know you need me to go to Berkeley or Harvard. I get that. I need to have a 4.63 GPA. I get that. But don't reify perfection here. Don't reify getting things right. Let me each summer jump into a project that's impossible, that I'm going to completely fail at. No kid can talk to his parents like this, but it would be lovely if a kid could. And it would be lovely if parents would allow for this kind of conversation, because we're making a really important distinction here. Yes, you have to play a certain game to make it through to the end result of your PhD from UCLA, mm-hmm. You have to play a certain game, but you're not going to be a creative or satisfied person if you don't have permission from yourself to really make mistakes and messes.
There was a guest we had on quite a while ago, I will not be able to pull out who it was, who would ask his children in the most loving manner, what did you do that you failed at today?
Yeah, that's a tiny bit odd way of saying things to me. I'm not sure how that message works over time. I would probably say it I like the message, but not the language.
I'm going to agree with that one. So let's jump into the third one, being calm. Maybe let's talk about a few of your top anxiety tools.
Well, one you mentioned at the top of the show, I really like it, and folks really like it, and that's actually using a snow globe as a device where you shake it up, mm-hmm. and as the snow settles, you grow calm. You grow calm as the snow settles. I think it's a lovely visual way to picture calmness. So I like the snow globe as a device - tool. Deep breathing has been known for thousands of years to help just learning 5-second on the inhale, 5-second on the exhale, deep breaths is useful. For me, the most valuable tool, and I did a whole book on this called 10 Zen Seconds, and the 10 of the title there is the 5 seconds on the inhale, 5 seconds on the exhale. It's the idea of using a deep breath as a container for calming thought. So you get both the benefits of the breath and the benefits of good cognition. Obviously, a thought has to fit in a breath. It has to be just 3 or 4 or 5 words. One kind of thought that is useful is I'm completely on the inhale, stopping on the exhale. Completely stopping. Stopping all my anxious racing. Stopping the rat race. Stopping my need to get things right. Stopping this, stopping that. So the shorthand there is I'm completely stopping. Another one that I like is I trust on the inhale. I trust my resources. Or let's say you're doing something that's been difficult and tires you out. I return with strength. So the simple idea here is to begin to make use of the power of breathing and the power of right thinking by dropping calming thoughts into a deep breath. I think that's probably my number one go-to. No, it's my number 2. Let me do my number 1 in a second. It's my number 2 go-to calming mechanism is to marry breathing and thinking in a way that actually serves to calm you. My number 1 way is to visualize a switch inside of you, which, when you flip it, just turns you into a calmer person. That is to make a certain decision, all of a sudden, fewer dramas, fewer histrionics, fewer this, fewer that. Make a decision to be a calmer person and use that visualizing of flipping the switch in the calm position to help as a kind of visual reminder of your new goal in life to just be a calmer person.
If you're anxious and you're not sure why you're anxious, you're kind of hyped up, revved up, can you still flip that calmness switch, or does it take something more?
There isn't a simple answer there. Some people don't get the visualization, so it doesn't work for them at all. One headline is, we do not distinguish between states like enthusiasm and states like anxiety well at all.
So true.
So first we have to have some sense if we're even anxious and have a little conversation in that room that is our mind, in that easy chair or rocking chair. Am I even anxious or am I excited? Have that kind of conversation. There are lots of moving parts to your question. When things matter, we get more anxious than when things don't matter. So we're often surprised by the ways in which small things in quotes, make us anxious. So maybe in our day job, because we don't care about our day job, we'll spend $100 million of our company's money without blinking, not a bead of sweat. Who cares? $100 million, who cares? Then we come home, we try to find the word that finishes our poem, and that really matters to us. And suddenly we're so anxious that our poem isn't finished. So it's important to get clear on the odd ways that anxiety arises in human beings. Objectively, one might think that spending that $100 million appropriately or inappropriately is the bigger deal than finding a word for your poem, but that's not how subjective reality works. So, as I say, we're talking about many things simultaneously here. The headline is to practice and own one anxiety management technique. There are probably somewhere between a dozen and 20 categories of anxiety management techniques, including many somatic ones. I think you mentioned in your intro, silent screaming.
I did.
That's a somatic one. That's where you make a big screamy face and you get the anxiety out as if you were actually screaming. So there are lots of things to try. People don't try things often enough. They just stay anxious. They white-knuckle life. They stay anxious. Rather than creating the following sentence, which is, maybe actually learning anxiety management would help me manage my anxiety. Most people don't go down that route of actually learning what helps them.
And that would go right back to number 1, being smart.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Let's go from there. Let's go briefly to number 4, being clear. And this is a really hard one for people. What's the importance of saying things directly?
There's a real power in speaking in sentences that are 6 or 7 or 8 words long that come with genuine periods. When we speak at length, we're often apologizing, changing our mind on the fly, making sure the other person isn't upset with what we're saying, discounting ourselves. We're doing a lot of things that don't serve us when we use lots of words. So I have clients really work on saying sentences of that 6, 7, 8 word length or shorter, like, that's not okay, with a period. Now, sometimes a person manages to find the courage in a family situation to say that's not okay, and then say 9 other things that make it seem like maybe it really is okay.
Mixed messages.
Mixed messages. And they come from our hidden agendas and mixed places, mixed messages. It takes a lot of strength to say something like, that's not okay, and just let the period be there. I think that's one of the skills that therapists learn, different from diagnosing and treating mental disorders. They don't learn that at all. That's all preposterous. But what they do learn is how to be with someone, and also how to say things like, that's not okay, with a period. They learn that kind of strength in speaking, and I think all human beings need to learn that kind of strength in speaking, and produce that kind of clarity both inside and then externally by the words they use.
Thank you. And the corollary to that is it's important to ask for clarification if you need it.
Absolutely. And you can ask for it as if you are criticizing, or you can ask for it in some other way. Often when we speak, most human beings speak much more critically than they realize. They don't realize they're criticizing the other person. Maybe it's only 30% criticism and 70% message, but that 30% criticism gets received, you know. So rather than saying something in a critical way there, you might say, you know, I'm really not quite sure I got your whole message. Can I just follow up with a question? That's not going to be received as criticism. Whereas if you say it in some other kind of way, that wasn't clear at all what you said. Can you say that again in some other way or something? That's not my difficulty. That's you having messed up the utterance.
I think that's one I honestly get to work out with Jessica, which is sometimes I don't understand what she's saying, and I'm saying, I don't understand. I don't get it. And if I can stop and pause and say, it's probably a great thing that you're saying, but is there a different way you can say it so I can understand it better?
Or I often will say things which are not true, like, you know, I'm feeling really dull today, and you know, if I were a little sharper, I think I would have gotten what you said on the first go around.
Like
but
smooth.
You know, it's that I'll put it completely on my shoulders, because it just, there's so much less undoing in life. You don't have to do the thing over again. You don't have to go through the fight, and you don't have to go through the thing if you just take it on your shoulders. As long as you're not taking it on your shoulders in a weak way, but if you're doing it in a strategic way, if you're doing it in a way that's just smooth, as you say, then that's ultimately useful in dyadic relationships and in family relationships.
Thank you. We'll go touch real briefly on this one. I think we've been really talking about it this whole time, but the importance of being aware or paying close attention.
I think that's right. I think maybe we can hop over it. I think it's very much like all the different things we're talking about, clarity and certain ways of being strong in yourself. So I think we can just allow it to stand there as an obvious thing. We need to be aware of what's going on. I think there's a sense in which awareness for me means things like, since there are family secrets, since it's possible, it sounds absurd and yet we know it goes on all the time, it's possible to be in a family with an alcoholic and that person never gets called being an alcoholic the whole time children are growing up and what have you. There are ways in which that person stays under the radar or gets away with it, so to speak. So I think that's a place where upgrading our ability to be aware really helps, because then suddenly we understand why our parent always fails to pick us up at 3, or always breaks his promises, or always does this or does that. Suddenly we get it. This thing that we've really never understood as a child does not make any sense to us. Why can't mom or dad show up at 3? How hard is that? Suddenly we get it. Oh, they're off drinking. They have an addiction. La, la, la. So getting that awareness helps take the burden off our shoulder, that burden of confusion off our shoulders.
Gotcha. From there, what's the difference? The next one is being brave. What's the difference between being strong and being brave?
Well, there are things that we have to do in life that don't scare us. They're just hard. And so that's where strength comes in. It may not scare us to, I don't know, do a certain kind of job. Make sure our bookcase stands up rather than tilts over. It just takes a certain kind of strength to make that happen, but it's not scaring us. But many things in life, many things in life do scare us and make us anxious. And that's why we need to face those things with courage, more than just anxiety management techniques. But let's say that you're aware that your son is drinking too much. Mm-hmm. You're just aware of that. And you know, you could bet a nickel or a dollar or your whole savings account that if you bring it up, you're going to have a scene. He's going to deny it. He's going to bring up your drinking, whatever. There's going to be a scene. It takes a lot of courage to decide to have that conversation. That's more than strength. That's the courage to understand that there's going to be a scene, to tolerate the scene, to tolerate the consequences, to tolerate even a rupture, which is very hard to countenance. It's very hard for that to feel okay. Mm-hmm. That if I have this conversation with my son, he could walk out the door and I might not see him again. Now that may be the worst case scenario, and most likely that's not what's happening. But I think viewers can feel how hard it would be, how much courage is required to hold that conversation when the outcome could be that large.
And you would encourage people after they've become aware, after they've stepped back, that if they need to, then they have to go for it.
They do, and they may want to practice. This would come back to clarity, or smarts or strength. They may want to practice in a mirror the things they're going to say. They may want to, and this works very well, they might want to visualize the whole conversation, because surprisingly, we can do a pretty good job of knowing, if I say this, my son will say that. Then I could say this, he's going to say that when I say this. Then I could say that. It's actually surprisingly easy to go down that whole scenario, and by going down that scenario, do a better job rather than the worst job of choosing your language, maybe not saying X because you know that X is always inflammatory, etc. So these different skills come together there, where you can maybe do a better job of rehearsing and preparing before doing this thing that requires courage. By the way, preparation is anxiety provoking, so it takes even courage to prepare in life. So everything swirls back around on itself.
I like it. And so we're gonna take one more swirl there, which is after you've practiced, when you're being brave in that moment, you need to be present.
You do. And for me, I hold two different kinds of presences, and they're both valuable. There's, let's call it maybe the mindfulness or Buddhist or this or that kind of presence, where you're empty, and if you're peeling a potato, you're just peeling a potato. That is, if you're having a conversation with your son, like the one we just described, you're not also thinking about your retirement account or if the lawn needs mowing or anything extraneous. You're really there. Mm-hmm. However, there's another sense of presence that creative folks need to master, and that's when you're peeling a potato, think about your novel. There's no reason why you always have to be peeling a potato and thinking about the potato, being present to the potato. Because as a creative person, we have an imagination, we have these billions of neurons doing work. Mm-hmm. So that's a second sense of presence where you can be present to a task and also present to your own imagination simultaneously. That confuses matter, but I really want to sort of make it clear that there isn't just the empty presence or the, let's call it, complete presence. There's also a kind of dynamic presence where one is present to the task at hand, but also present to your inner life at the same time. And you need to know how to move from one to the other. When you're having the conversation with your son, you're not also thinking about your novel. Lots of creative people do that too much. They're not really present to the people in their life because they're thinking about their next painting or whatever. The symphony is coming to them. They need to turn that off. It's hard to do. I did a whole book on productive obsessions, and it's hard to turn a productive obsession off because it feels productive. But we do have to turn those productive obsessions off for the sake of having that kind of conversation with our son.
That makes sense. And I'm going back. I'm having a productive obsession with the potato and how that can almost be a meditative state because you're just doing a mindless, in a sense, repetitive action. And what a perfect time to go work on your painting, in a sense, or work on that novel. What's the importance of resilience?
Well, I mean, the headline importance of resilience is that our family doesn't go away. Challenges don't go away. If we were dealing with a coworker and left that job and never had to see that coworker again, we wouldn't, in a certain sense, need to be resilient around that issue. It would be over. But with family members, whether it's family of origin folks or our current family, or as so many people are in now, the sandwich place of having aging parents and having semi-adult children. And we need resilience because we are not in control of other people. We can hardly influence them. We can try to be of some influence. We can model right behaving and right thinking and right acting. We can model certain stuff and be slightly influential. But since we can't actually control the people around us, they're going to keep doing their stuff. They're going to keep annoying us, upsetting us, making us crazy. They're going to keep doing their stuff. And so we need our resilience. We need the resilience in order to be able to return to the other 7 skills each time that one of these things come up, because we're surprisingly open to being disturbed again by family members. And let me say parenthetically, this has surprised me. I've done, I don't know, maybe 20 or so interviews on this book, and many hosts have particularly wanted to talk about difficult and dark sibling relationships. It kind of surprised me how often it's come up for hosts in their own lives, in conversation or in these interviews, ruptures, abuse, breaks, all kinds of really dark things around siblings. Well, that's because you're roughly of the same age. You're all going through life sort of this together, and you're obviously going to need to be if you're sort of walking with another person side by side, you're going to need lots of resilience to deal with that person who's walking beside you, virtually from the beginning of time to the end of time.
There's along those lines, there's a question that comes up a lot that I get emailed or asked in coaching, which is, what do you do if you're doing the work and you feel like you're making the big changes, but someone or your family isn't supportive or isn't coming along for the ride? What do you do?
Well, there are different pieces to that answer. The first is the safety piece. If what's going on is dangerous to you, you have to get the heck out of there, or enlist allies, or report something, or do something. So it depends in part on how dangerous this thing is that the other person is doing. If it requires a safety maneuver, then that's what comes first. In the book, I talk about all kinds of tactics you can try. Maybe having a conversation by the lake will be different from having the same conversation for the 1,000th time as each of you are passing each other at the kitchen table. Maybe you have to plan for a different kind of conversation. That is, you may have to go to the level of tactics and strategies and just try some things out to see if they make any difference. And you have to do what's smart for you to do. If that means not coming to Thanksgiving, then you need your talking points for why you're not coming to Thanksgiving. Then you have to deal with your feelings about having dishonored or betrayed the family by not coming to Thanksgiving. There's lots of things to think about here. That's why I'm inviting people to understand some of the complexities here. There are things there's nothing simple to try, but there are things to try, and they're worth trying.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I like, in every show, I like to put on my coach's hat. In this case, I'm going to put the coach's hat on you, which is to say, I don't want people to just listen to this today and not take action. What one homework assignment would you give people today?
If there were one homework assignment, I think it would be, let's call it a two-step homework assignment. It would be to visualize the change you would like to see. Do your own simple guided visualization around, getting centered and getting quiet and getting an image of what you would like to see be different. Hold that image and then ask yourself the question, what might get me there? Just that simple two-step process of seeing the change and then wondering, maybe even, I like this, even as a sleep thinking prompt, go to bed with the wonder what might get me there. And then in the morning, maybe do some journaling around the same question, what might get me there, and see if anything emerges.
Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My wife, Jessica, she's the producer. She always wants me to ask a question before the end for parents and their kids. What advice would you give parents today to help their kids?
Oh, that's so simple. We act like love is a given. It's not. We have to be love for there to be any love there. Love your kids.
Woohoo! Thank you so much. On that note, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Oh, that's so easy for me right now. We have new twin granddaughters who are going to be one just about in a week. And rolling around on the floor with them gives me the most happiness. There's nothing like it. Having a pillow fight with them, nothing better.
Awesome. On that note, and Jessica will certainly be listening and taking note. On that note, where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful book?
Well, they can go to any bookstore that they frequent for the book. To learn more about me, they can come to my site, ericmaisel.com. That's EricMaisel.com. There's lots there about my trainings and services and books and everything I do.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch ericmaisel.com and you're driving down the road, come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to ericmaisel.com. Any last words of wisdom you want to share, Eric, before we dive into a really brief meditation?
I think the only thing I would want to share is the thing I started out with, and that is, if you are having troubles and you end up at some mental health professional's office, you're going to end up with a diagnosis. Before you go to that office, just think through if the troubles maybe are rooted in your family life and if there's something to make better there.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Would you have time then for a brief guided meditation of your calling?
I think I might do the one I just mentioned. I might be just repeating myself, but maybe it would be the meditation around. So if a viewer would just like to get settled and shut his or her eyes.
As long as you're not driving.
As long as you're not driving. And feel through, think through, have arise a family situation that isn't working. Could be you and a parent, could be you and a sibling, you and a mate, you and a child, something that just isn't working. Let it run like a little movie. You know what it looks like and you know what it feels like, so you're going to need some courage here to tolerate feeling it, because there are going to be feelings associated with it, but see it. And when you have the picture clear enough that you are seeing it, Ask yourself the question, what could look different here? Actually, let the visualization or let the imagery change in a way that reflects genuine change between you and the other person. And if you can see this change, if you can see what might be lovely to have as a next step, then you can end the visualization with the question, how do I get here? How do I get from the way it is to this beautiful thing I can see? How do I get there? And then you would come back, and if there's something to write down, if there's something to record, if there's something to know from this, you would write it down, and then most importantly, you'd act on it.
Woohoo! Thank you so much, Eric. This has been a true treasure and a treat, and I don't think there's a single person on this planet who couldn't benefit from help on overcoming their difficult family.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Got to crank it up for the finish. For everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, begin taking those steps today to overcome your difficult family, and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Eric.
You're welcome. That was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!